Hi guys, so today I'm going to be doing a commentary of my latest illustration, which is called the Hall of Arcanum Academy. This illustration was thought out as a big piece that would include all of my smaller daily entries for Inktober. So it was kind of unwieldy a little bit, and I had to be quite flexible when I started planning it, but I'm really glad of how it turned out. And so today I'm gonna be watching the time-lapse of the coloring of this illustration, and I'm gonna be doing a commentary and sort of reflecting on my workflow, which I think and hope you'll find interesting. And I think it will be interesting for me to see where I could have gone a different way and where I could have definitely made different choices for it to be, I don't know, more straightforward maybe. So let's watch the video. So I had to put my glasses on, which will make kind of like a ring on my lenses, but otherwise I can't see the screen because I'm blind. So yeah, anyway. First of all, I wanted to create a scene that was gonna be sort of like a snapshot of a situation, like a normal everyday situation in the Hall of Arcanum Academy, which is the magic academy where my characters go to school. It's not like a normal school, like boarding school, like where you have classes and you go to these classes, there's a teacher and they will teach you stuff. Like it's more like sort of private mentor to pupil sort of relationship where you just take as many classes that you need in one specific subject according to your talents. So it's not like Harry Potter. Anyway, the building has been there for centuries, so it makes sense that it would be built up of many different styles according to which area of the building was built in that specific time period. My inspiration was for Victorian manor house because I just love the aesthetic, but there's also other sort of like elements that go with it. Anyway, so this is the main composition that I wanted to give the scene, and as you can see, it's super rough. Like I am a very messy sketcher, as I've said in multiple times. The reason why I wanted to have this sort of like open hallway so that I could fit as many characters and props as possible, and one of the reasons why in the list I actually started included props and magical creatures as well as people is because I couldn't fit any more people in it. So of course, in terms of the composition of the illustration, you want to have a composition that flows. The eye of the viewer is kind of drawn to different pockets of what you can see in the scene. So I didn't want all the characters to be standing in one area. I wanted them to look quite natural, like they would do things that are normal for their character. I first created the setting, this hallway, and then I decided to place some people on the stairs and some people like sitting in the chairs in the middle ground, and then there's the other two people in the foreground, sort of like going out of the scene. So if you look at it, you can see that there's actually sort of like a round composition where if you start or finish if you start with the people sitting in the chairs and then you go around behind them, in the very far corner next to what will become a library, basically a library shelves, and then you go up on the top stairs and you come down the stairs and come out of the view with the two characters that are sort of like in the very foreground going out of the scene. Or you could go, counterclockwise the other way around. But the point is that you can see that there's like there's a direction to the composition, and if you divide it in threes or in six, like most photographers do, there's also like the arrangement of the pockets of people are sort of placed in strategic areas of the screen. Like the two people reading are in the bottom left-hand corner, the two people coming out are in the bottom right-hand corner, and there's something happening in the top right-hand corner and something happening in the top left-hand corner. I'm very bad at distinguishing right hand and left hand. I don't know if that's like a common problem. I think some people have it. I do. I'm terrible at giving directions in a car, I tell you. Anyway, I had all these different types of witches, so I thought, okay, I'm gonna group the 4 weeks in October with 7 characters from each sort of order or category of which. And as you can see, this is how I developed the list. And the little numbers on top of each character are me deciding where they would go. And I wanted to sort of jump around a little bit, so you can see that like 1 is not close to 2 and vice versa, because I didn't want people to get a feel that like the characters fit together. I wanted to be quite a surprise that this piece would come out in the end. So I wanted to sort of jump around and ensure that people wouldn't guess what I was doing. After I made the list, I had to create all of the individual characters, which of course took 1 month. And I'm gonna go quickly through the time-lapse of one of the characters. I won't be doing all of the characters because that's way too many. I'm just gonna be talking very quickly about the character and then moving on to the rest of the piece. This is a time-lapse taken from Procreate, which is the app that I use to draw on my iPad. And this is basically the 4th character that I drew. So this is a fire acolyte, which means it's a witch, like an elemental witch who can work with fire. And their type of witch is very much related to religion, as in like a very spiritual way of looking at fire as a mean to bring destruction but also life. And they are very much connected to the idea of the circle of fire. I wanted this character to remind people of the idea of a circle, so that it would be very clear that it's connected to this holiness. And so what I did was to give her a bald head, and also the position that she's in, she's got kind of like a ring of fire, sort of like swirling around her hand, which she's doing kind of subconsciously whilst reading. Also her earrings are circular, and her robe, which is a ceremonial sort of like traditional robe for her order, has a very big sort of round collar. So the whole thing is, you know, thought up to remind people of circles. And that's kind of like the point of character design, to make sure that you are reinforcing the character's personality and set of beliefs in their clothing, in their posture, in everything about them. So usually my style used to be quite clean cut and sort of, just basically very clean with no line art. Instead, most recently, I've been trying to become a little bit more... I don't know, I've just liked the idea of experimenting with a style that was a bit more fresh, a bit less clean cut. So I just did very quick sketches and used a very sort of traditional looking texture brush, which I got from Shi-Yun Kim, who's a character artist that I absolutely love. So what I do usually is that I put in the scene that I'm doing, I put a few characters to keep myself on the same level in terms of sketch. And then I do a very, very quick sketch, like basically just like a placeholder, so that I would know what kind of position the character needs to have in the bigger picture. And then do a different sketch on top, very rough, and then go in and do another take. And this one, the 3rd take, is usually the actual line art. And again, because the style is supposed to be messy on purpose, it's okay. Even with the coloring, I just do a very quick color with the lasso tool, which is different from the lasso tool on Photoshop, because this is the lasso tool on Procreate. But basically you just tap around the figure and you can then fill it in. So I create a very, very quick outline of the character, and then proceed to do all of the flat colors, which means the colors that don't have any shading or texturing or anything. They're just like one block color. And then on top of that, I do some details like the blush. And again, because this is very sort of like quick and sketchy, I used to do these characters in probably like half an hour or 1 hour in the coloring. So I'm not going overboard with details and stuff. I'm just gonna do quickly the color details, and then some shading on a different layer, some lighting on, again, a different layer. And that's it. The character is done. So it's very quick as a style, much quicker than some other pieces that I did in the past, where I go in and get rid of all of the line art and try and make it look more painterly. Because I knew that this was going to be such a big illustration, I didn't want to obsess with details of each single character, because I knew that in the end, the power of this illustration would be the fact that it was so complex with so many characters, not so much about one single character. As you can see, it's already looking quite nice, I think, with all of the characters in the picture. What I needed to do now in terms of the cleanup of the background was to go in and do some more details, like for example the details in the rugs, which for now are just two blank sort of like areas, and then reposition all of the characters in the scene. You know, after I worked with all of the characters individually, I had to put them back in, and of course some of them didn't fit quite as well as I thought in my mind they would have fit, so I just had to shuffle them around a little bit. For now I'm gonna be focusing on the lighting. So as you can see, with the lasso tool, I'm starting to highlight certain areas that I know will have to be darker and certain areas that I know will be lighter. It's always good to have a plan about lighting before you start coloring, because otherwise you end up with all of your flat colors and then you wonder like, oh, but maybe I should have colored this piece a bit lighter, because in the end this area will be flooded by light. So instead of doing that, you can just think about it ahead, even though I sometimes forget to do it, and then I end up with a lot of problems down the line. After making some plans regarding the light, I realized that I want to add some more detail that would make the academy a bit more green. There are two types of witches, and one type is more sort of like artifact related, so they are very happy in cities and buildings, and one type is elemental, so they have to have some sort of contact with nature. So I thought about the Victorian manor sort of aesthetic, and I was like, yeah, I like that, but kind of like a green Victorian manor. So I started adding loads of different plants and weeds and stuff like that, so that it made it look a bit overgrown, especially around Imogen, who's the girl with red head and the wooden staff that is crouching on one of the banisters. She's like very feral. She's one of the main characters and one of my favorite characters to write. So from her, it's actually coming like a whole branch of ivy. And I don't know if you can see it from the scene, but basically she's planning to play a prank on Miran and Iniene, who are the two girls at the bottom of the banister. Miran is the girl with the water swirling around her hands. She's kind of like, I wouldn't say a villain, because she isn't a villain really. Well, she's kind of like a mean girl to my main character, and Imogen loves to take the piss and play pranks on them. I am gonna start doing all of the block coloring for the plants, which are gonna be on a layer that is on top of everything else. And then I'm gonna start focusing on the floor. So for the floor, I actually brought in some references of Victorian manors floors and later on rugs. So I think references, like especially for coloring, are super good. Like I can't stress enough how important it is to have references. I don't think they take away from the artist's sort of originality at all. They're just a good way to make sure that you know what you're doing, and the things that you are drawing are set in, you know, in a world that is believable. And you can change references, like you don't have to do one room exactly in the way that the reference is, but you can actually take more than one reference and put them all together to give birth to something new but also believable. The way that I'm proceeding with the block colors for the background is that I create a layer where I fill in a shape, one basic shape of an element. So for example, I start with the front stairs, so I color them all with one flat color, and then I create a layer on top and create a clipping mask. So basically you just have to right click on the layer that you want to make into a mask and select create clipping mask. So this helps because you keep the layer underneath clean, but you can color on top with different colors, so you can experiment with different colors without actually having to change the layer underneath. I find that it's a really good way of operating also with characters, so that like you have more layers on top of the base layer where you can draw each single element, like the hair or the mouth or whatever, and still keep that basic layer clean as a fail-safe, if you know what I mean. So I have one basic brown for the stairs, and then color with different brown each element, so like the base of the banister, the carpet on the stairs, and I'm gonna apply the same reasoning with everything else in the scene as well. So I'm gonna create new layers in a logical order, so what makes sense to go backward goes on a layer that is underneath, and what makes sense logically to go in the front goes on a layer that goes in the front. So in this way, not doing everything on one layer allows me to have a bit more freedom and a bit more flexibility. So if I get something wrong, I don't have to redo everything, but just that specific layer. I end up usually with quite big file sizes because I have tons of layers, but then after I'm done with focusing on that area, I just collapse all of the layers into one layer, so it's gonna be a bit smaller in the end. So as you can see, some elements I did fairly quickly, like for example the stairs and stuff. I knew that they were gonna be, well, mostly brown, and the stairs, of course, they were gonna be red because those are very normal, common Victorian colors for houses. But the walls of the house were actually quite hard. So in the end, what I did, as you can see, is that I keep switching back and forth with the characters and without the characters, because as you can see, there's like this very weird like optical perception that when you put the characters in, because of all the shades the characters bring to the scene, it looks as though the paint on the wall is changing, and also the brown of the stairs, which is actually quite a warm brown, all of a sudden becomes a very greenish sort of brown. So because of that, I had to do quite a few takes to see which color would fit best. And of course, the window was quite a pivotal area for the scene because that's where the light comes in. So in my mind, the light was gonna come in through that window and through sort of like a big top window at the top of the flight of stairs. I already painted the windows sort of like yellowish, orangish, because it's supposed to be sometime in the late afternoon in autumn, so we have this beautiful like sort of golden hour sunlight flooding the hallway. And the only thing left to do is to put some more color details in the flowers, which were previously all just green. And then I start working on the lighting and shading, which is arguably one of the most time-consuming sort of like part of any illustration, in my opinion, because I don't really paint a lot in block colors. I just lay the block colors and then create layers on top of layers with different blending settings to give all the effects with the lighting and shading. So usually I create first some sort of generic layers for shading with a large brush, a very large soft brush. I usually go over and start as if with like sedimenting different areas of shade. So first, of course, the first areas where the shadows were going to be most intense, like planned out earlier on. So in all the areas, like the foreground areas and the top right-hand corner, where there's definitely not going to be any light because they are not exposed to any windows, and they are very far away from where the light would sort of like pool. So those areas are definitely going to be more in shade than other areas that are directly or indirectly exposed to light or to lamp lights, which I also have in the scene. First, I'm gonna use like a very sort of neutral blue, paint some generic shadows, and then I'm gonna use the geometric lasso to highlight certain areas on the floor, which is where the sun from the light comes through. And these are very elongated, sort of rectangular shapes, which are basically the rectangular panels of the windows, but flat on the floor. And I love that sort of effect of like light coming in a room through a window, because you can just make it very geometrical and very neat. So it's obvious where it's coming from, and it gives you the idea of how low the sun is outside. So yeah, that's in general, that's one of my favorite lighting settings. So all of my lighting settings are usually overlay, add, or color dodge, sometimes screen. But these are the ones that I use most often, because they give this really nice effect, like the light is actually adding on top of the colors that are already in the scene, so it's making it more saturated. And I think it gives quite a nice pop. It's not necessarily the best thing to use if you're doing an illustration for a print, because it might not really come out that well when it's printed. But if you have a screen, and so if you're just doing digital illustrations that are supposed to be looked at through a screen, that's great. So as you can see, I'm adding some lights from the lamps. So it's colored lights, like the natural sort of like Art Deco lamps that are green and blue. A different like tinted light, like yellow, but it's going through green sort of like strata of glass. So the light that they're giving is actually green. So I'm adding that in green, and then there's the chandelier that it's got like purple light. So the light that is reflecting on the back of the stairs, where there's the Arcanum Academy logo engraving or like wood carving at the back of the stairs. It's purplish, pinkish, as well as the magic that the witch in front of the window is summoning. The more I go on, the more I add more specific and more localized shadows to make certain objects like pop more. Shadows before that I added were area shadows, sort of affect a whole area indistinctively. Instead, now I'm adding shadows that are supposed to make the objects look more three-dimensional, because they are highlighting the shape that object has in relation to the source of light. It's a very slow process. Like I find with lighting and shading, it's not so much one or two layers with like 100% opacity that make the trick, but it's more like 7 or 8 layers that at very low opacity that building one on top of each other with different blending settings give the sort of effect that you want to achieve. If you keep a look on the right hand layer sort of like situation, you can see how many layers I'm building and how many different blending settings I'm using. So for example, one of the last lighting layers that I do usually is either an overlay or add layer, where I really pump up the lighting value in those areas where the sun is sort of coming through. So they're giving you that sort of shimmering effect that you can see also in reality. So for example, I'm doing it here next to the window frames and also on the characters that are very close to the window. And on the floor, as you can see, the lighting on the floor is like it's more intense near the window, and it goes less intense as it goes away from the window. So these are all things that you need to think about, like when you observe reality. And in reality, you can see that lighting is stronger, of course, when it's closer to its source of light. So it makes sense that as you move away from the light, it goes weaker and weaker, and that's something that you also need to think about when you turn it into an illustration. I am almost done. As you can see here on the side, I have all these different texturing brushes, which I think are from an artist who's called Alvarez, and I bought them, I think, on ArtStation. So ArtStation is a website where you can upload your art, and also they have a market where artists sell brushes or other presets. So I think I bought them on that website specifically, and it's got loads of texturing brushes. Texturing brushes are really hard because there's so many, and unless you know exactly what you're doing, they're likely to do more harm than good. But I have a few that I like to use. For example, this one is called Chalk, and it's like a vertical slash, which I really like because it gives the illustration this sort of very material feeling. So I usually use it on overlay or add or color dodge at the end of the illustration, and I just put it in areas where the lighting is very obvious, so it gives this feeling like the light is also creating some sort of optical effect, like it's making it shimmer. So in this case I'm doing it everywhere where it would make sense that the lighting is giving you this sort of optical effect. And as you can see, I am almost done because I put my watermark, MLM_illustration 2020, which is the writing that I put on each one of my illustrations as like a signature. But then my partner came in the room. I was like, do you like it? And he was like, yeah, it's really good, but the light source is different from like the top of the stairs and the window. And I was like, shit, he's right. So like, as I was saying before, from the window you can see that the light is at sunset, so it's like diagonal in comparison to the room. But then from the middle of the illustration, like from the top of the stairs, you can see the light sort of like coming like straight through. And I was like, yeah, either this world has two suns or this doesn't make any sense. So I just very quickly corrected it with the geometric lasso tool. I just highlighted that area in the stairs, and on all of the different lighting layers I simply pressed Command T, which is the free transform tool in Photoshop, and just literally just rotated those layers, like that area of those layers, so that the light would come at the same, not precisely the same, but at a similar angle as the light coming through the window, so that it doesn't look weird. That's it. Yeah, looking back, I think there are several things that I could have done better, several things that I could have definitely planned better from the start. Like, for example, I did that sketch, of course, to plan the characters, and I used the position of the characters in the sketch to work on their positions like individually, but I could have maybe done that a little better, like a bit more accurately, because in the end I had a little bit of trouble actually making them fit together. But aside from that, I think I'm quite happy with how it turned out. Like, coloring it all took quite a bit of time, especially the lighting part, because that was the part where I really wanted to give the wow factor. But yeah, you live and learn. So yeah, so that's how I worked on this illustration, and I hope that you found it useful. If you're one of my patrons, you have the PSD files and the high-res image to download, and if you're one of my clan tier patrons, you also have this as a print of the month, and will be delivered to you by the end of the month. So yeah, I guess that's all for now, and I'll see you later.